The chandeliers of the Astoria Grand shimmered like frozen fireworks as polished silverware clinked across white tablecloths. It was one of those evenings when everyone in the room pretended to be more important than they actually were. At the center table sat Victoria Langford, 23, blonde, wealthy, and bored. Her father owned Langford Holdings, one of the biggest logistics firms on the East Coast, and tonight, she was here to impress her fiancé's family. The restaurant buzzed with soft jazz and polite laughter until a new waiter approached their table. He wasn't part of the regular staff. His uniform was perfectly ironed, but he wore it with the quiet awkwardness of someone still getting used to the fit. He had dark brown skin, sharp cheekbones, and an accent that carried traces of somewhere warm. Maybe Africa, maybe the Caribbean. "Good evening," he said softly. "Welcome to the Astoria Grand. May I take your order?" Victoria glanced up, one perfectly shaped eyebrow arching. Her fiancé, Preston, smirked and whispered, "Hope he understands English." Victoria giggled. "We'll see." The waiter caught the tone, though his face didn't change. "My name is Samuel. I'll be serving you tonight." His voice was steady, polite, respectful, but confident in a quiet way that unsettled Preston a little. As Samuel took their orders, Victoria mimicked his accent under her breath. "Would you like still or sparkling?" she whispered to her friend across the table, imitating him. The girls laughed. Samuel looked up for just a second. Not angry, not hurt, just thoughtful. He finished writing down the order, nodded slightly, and walked away. The laughter lingered longer than it should have. When he returned with their drinks, Victoria noticed something strange. The man's hands didn't shake. He wasn't flustered. In fact, he carried himself like someone who'd done far more important things than carry glasses of wine. "Where are you from?" she asked, trying to sound casual but not really hiding the condescension. "Originally," he replied, smiling faintly, "Ghana." "Ah," Preston said, chuckling. "So that explains it." "Explains what, sir?" "The accent," Preston replied smugly. "Tough language, English, huh?" Samuel tilted his head slightly, as though studying him. "Not really," he said calmly. "It was my third." That earned him a few raised eyebrows around the table. "Third?" Victoria said, surprised. "You speak others?" "6, actually," Samuel answered quietly. "But only 3 fluently." The table went silent for a beat before Victoria laughed. "6? That's impressive for a waiter." Samuel nodded once, unbothered. "Thank you, ma'am." Then he turned and walked away again. In the kitchen, another waiter whispered, "You okay, Sam?" Samuel smiled. "I've been laughed at before. It doesn't change the truth." No one there knew that the man refilling glasses had once stood in lecture halls in Accra and Oxford, had published research papers on education reform, and was in the US under a fellowship program that hadn't quite gone as planned. He wasn't supposed to be a waiter, but life, he knew, rarely followed plans. As he set down the wine bottle, he overheard Preston saying, "I swear, if I ever sound like that, shoot me." The laughter hit harder this time. Samuel straightened slowly, eyes steady on the polished silver tray in his hands. He could walk away, or he could remember why he was here. 3 months earlier, he had arrived in New York as part of an international mentorship program sponsored by the United Nations Youth Division. His goal: study how Western institutions handled educational inequality and bring that knowledge back home. But then the grant funding had been delayed. His housing fell through. He'd taken the job at the Astoria Grand to survive. It was temporary. It had to be. Still, the sting of laughter was one thing he never got used to. Later that evening, Victoria stumbled slightly as she left the table to take a phone call. She found Samuel cleaning a nearby counter. "You're still here?" she asked, a little tipsy. He smiled faintly. "Where else would I be?" She leaned against the counter. "You're, what's the word, persistent?" "Or patient," he replied. She laughed. I like that. You're funny. I wasn't trying to be. Her smile faltered, but curiosity flickered in her eyes. Why are you working here, anyway? You seem different. Samuel wiped his hands, thinking. Because sometimes life gives you a smaller stage to prepare for the big one. Victoria frowned. That's poetic. You write too. Sometimes. But mostly I speak. About what? He looked at her for a long moment. About people who laugh before they listen. She didn't know what to say, so she just walked away, tossing her hair. But that sentence would come back to her later, when the world stopped laughing. When Samuel's shift ended, he changed into a plain coat and stepped out into the cold Manhattan night. As he walked past the Astoria Grand, he heard the echo of laughter spilling out from the bright windows behind him. He smiled to himself. Someday, he whispered, they'll hear me properly. He walked toward the subway, passing a poster taped to a lamppost. UN Global Youth Conference. Call for speakers. Empowerment through education. He stopped for a second, reading it twice. The deadline was in 3 days. Samuel's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. Maybe, he murmured, my smaller stage is done. Then, with quiet resolve, he turned toward his apartment and opened his laptop. 3 days later, Samuel sat in his tiny studio apartment, the kind where the refrigerator hummed louder than the city outside. A single desk lamp illuminated the papers spread across his small table, research notes, draft speeches, and half-drunk coffee cups. He had spent the last 2 nights writing, deleting, and rewriting his submission for the UN Global Youth Conference. The theme, Rebuilding Dignity Through Education. He typed the last line and read it out loud. You cannot teach equality if you still decide who deserves respect. He paused, staring at the screen. For a moment, he saw flashes of that night. Victoria's laughter, Preston's smirk, the way their eyes had slid right through him like he didn't exist. His jaw tightened, but his voice softened. I don't want revenge, he whispered. I just want them to listen. He clicked submit and sat back, exhaling slowly. Days passed. The restaurant blurred into the same rhythm of noise, laughter, and invisible labor. Samuel wiped tables and carried trays, unnoticed as always. Until one afternoon, his manager approached him with a folded letter. This came for you, the manager said, frowning slightly. Looks official. Samuel unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Congratulations. You have been selected as one of 12 international speakers for the UN Global Youth Conference. For the first time in months, Samuel smiled fully, not the polite smile of a waiter, but one that reached his eyes. A week later, he was standing in front of a mirror at a thrift store, wearing a borrowed suit. It wasn't perfect, but it fit well enough. As he adjusted his tie, he remembered his mother's voice from years ago in Ghana. Never be ashamed of where you start, my son. The ground may be low, but the view is yours. He straightened his shoulders. The view is mine, he whispered. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria Langford was preparing for another gala. This one, ironically, tied to the UN's youth programs. Her father had donated a substantial amount to the event, and she was attending to network for her own PR agency. She flipped through the guest list idly. Boring politicians, overpaid donors. Oh, UN speakers, she murmured, half distracted. Probably another panel of professors. The night of the event arrived. The ballroom at the Hilton was vast, tall glass walls, banners with flags from around the world, rows of cameras and microphones. A red carpet led to the main stage, where the words Global Voices, Youth for Change glowed in blue light. Victoria, dressed in silver satin, sipped champagne as she scanned the crowd. Daddy, who are we listening to tonight? Her father shrugged. Some young professionals from Africa, Asia, Europe. I forget their names. One of them was apparently a teacher before he came here. Victoria rolled her eyes. Well, I hope he speaks English this time. Her father chuckled. Victoria. At that same moment, backstage, Samuel stood surrounded by translators and coordinators. His palms were sweaty, but his heartbeat was calm. Mr. Reed, a woman said, his coordinator. You're on in 3 minutes. Are you ready? He nodded. Always. He stepped toward the stage lights, every sound of clinking glasses and laughter fading behind him. The MC's voice echoed through the hall. Please welcome Mr. Samuel Reed, representing the Ghana Educational Initiative, speaking on restoring dignity through education. Applause rippled through the room. Victoria didn't look up at first. She was too busy scrolling her phone. But when she finally glanced toward the stage, the phone froze in her hand. There he was, the same waiter she had mocked, standing behind a UN podium, microphone gleaming, wearing a black suit and a blue tie. He wasn't carrying plates this time. He was carrying the room. Her mouth went dry. Samuel adjusted the mic. Good evening. He began, his accent still warm but his tone steady and commanding. Somewhere in the audience, Preston muttered, "No way, that's the waiter." Samuel smiled faintly, as if he'd heard. I was once told that my voice didn't belong in certain rooms, that my accent made me less credible, that I should stick to small places, quiet corners, and keep my dreams realistic. His words hung in the air like a slow tide pulling everyone closer. But here's what I've learned. Dignity doesn't come from where you speak. It comes from what you choose to say, and who you choose to be when they stop listening. The crowd went silent. Even the cameras stopped moving. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. He continued, his voice rising with quiet power. We talk about education like it's a privilege, but for millions of us, it's the only weapon we have against being invisible. The boy cleaning your floor might be the one designing your future. The woman serving your food might be the one funding your hospital. Respect shouldn't wait for status. The audience erupted into applause. From the corner, a camera zoomed in. Samuel's face lit by bright stage light, eyes shining, posture tall. When the speech ended, everyone stood. The applause grew louder and louder, echoing through the hall. Victoria couldn't move. Her mind replayed the night she laughed at him. The way he'd looked at her, calm, patient, almost forgiving. Now she realized why. He already knew who he was. Backstage, as the event ended, journalists crowded around him. Mr. Reed, how does it feel to stand here tonight? Samuel smiled humbly. It feels like being heard. Finally. He turned, walking through the crowd, and for a brief second, his eyes met Victoria's. She froze. He gave a small nod, not out of pride but acknowledgement, then continued walking toward the next group of reporters. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. That night, back in her penthouse, Victoria sat in silence. The laughter that once made her feel powerful now echoed in her head like shame. She turned on the TV. Samuel's speech was everywhere, trending across social media. The headline read, "From waiter to world speaker, Samuel Reed's message of dignity stuns the UN." She whispered his name quietly. Samuel. Meanwhile, Samuel sat by his apartment window, watching the city lights flicker. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I owe you an apology. Thank you for teaching me something I should have already known. Victoria." Samuel smiled softly. Then he typed back, "Thank you for listening." He turned back to the window. The night was quiet. The smaller stage was gone. A new one had begun. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Samuel's small apartment window. For the first time in years, he woke up not to the sound of an alarm, but to the sound of notifications, hundreds of them. His phone buzzed nonstop. Mentions, emails, calls from international outlets. Samuel Reed, the waiter who spoke at the UN. That was the headline splashed across every major platform. He rubbed his eyes, still half in disbelief. The man who once wiped down tables was now trending worldwide. A call came through from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Reed. A crisp voice spoke on the other end. This is Karen Holloway from CNN International. Your speech at the UN went viral overnight. We'd love to have you on our morning segment to discuss your story. Samuel blinked. You want me on CNN? Yes, she said warmly. Your message hit a nerve with millions of viewers. People are calling it the speech that humbled the elites. Can you come to our Manhattan studio by 9? Samuel smiled faintly. I'll be there. Across town, Victoria Langford sat at her marble kitchen island, watching the same broadcast replay. On screen, Samuel stood before the UN seal, poised and magnetic. His accent, the same one she had mocked, was now the very thing making his voice unforgettable. Every channel replayed the same line from his speech. Respect shouldn't wait for status. Played again, and each time it cut a little deeper. Her father walked in, pouring coffee. You see this? That's the young man from Ghana who spoke last night. Brilliant fellow. Victoria froze. You know him? Met him after the event. The UN's offering him a fellowship to lead global education initiatives. Said he used to work here in New York. Can you imagine that? She swallowed. Yes, I can. Her father didn't catch the tone. Well, some people just have the drive, don't they? Maybe we'll invite him to our corporate summit next month. Would do us good to have a real success story for once. She nodded silently, eyes still fixed on Samuel's face glowing on the screen. At CNN Studios, Samuel sat across from Karen Holloway under the glare of studio lights. Mr. Reed, she began, smiling. Millions are calling you an inspiration, but I have to ask, how does it feel to have people who once ignored you now calling you a hero? Samuel took a breath, his hands folded calmly on his lap. I don't want to be a hero, he said softly. I just want people to see each other. Not the labels, not the accents, not the uniforms. Just people. Karen nodded. Your humility is part of what's moving so many. Tell me, is it true you worked as a waiter before this? Samuel smiled slightly. Yes, the Astoria Grand. I was saving up to continue my research and waiting for the fellowship funding. I met all kinds of people there. Some kind, some less kind. Karen leaned forward. And what would you say to those who looked down on you back then? Samuel looked directly into the camera. I'd say I forgive you, because if I carry bitterness, I lose the lesson. I'd rather carry gratitude. It travels further. For a moment, the studio was silent. Even the crew stopped moving. That evening, social media exploded again, this time not just with praise, but reflection. People began posting stories about the workers they'd once overlooked. The janitor who smiled every morning. The delivery driver who remembered their names. Hashtag Respect the Invisible began trending globally. News anchors quoted his line. Teachers wrote it on classroom boards. Even CEOs reposted it, calling it a wake-up call for modern humanity. But for Samuel, the most surprising message came from the Astoria Grand. Dear Mr. Reed, we saw your speech and could not be prouder to have once had you as part of our team. If you're ever in the area, dinner is on us. Management. Asterisk. Samuel chuckled softly. Life has a sense of humor. A few days later, he received another email, this time from an unexpected sender. From Victoria.Langford@langfordper.com. Subject: an apology and an invitation. Samuel, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Sincerely. I was cruel, and I didn't see you for who you were. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. I'm helping organize a charity dinner for global education initiatives next month, and I'd love for you to be our keynote speaker. I understand if you decline. Victoria. He read the message twice, then leaned back, thinking. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who once mocked his accent now wanted his voice to lead her event. But something in her tone felt genuine, humble even. He smiled faintly and typed a short reply. I'll come. But only if the dinner isn't just for the wealthy. Let's make sure the workers are invited too. A minute later, she replied. Deal. Weeks later, the charity dinner arrived. The same chandeliers, the same grand piano, even some of the same faces from that night months ago. But this time, the energy was different. Samuel walked into the Astoria Grand not in uniform, but in a sleek navy suit, camera flashes reflecting off his cufflinks. The staff recognized him immediately. One of the cooks grinned. "Mr. Reed, you're famous now." Samuel smiled warmly. "Still Samuel, my friend." Inside the hall, Victoria stood near the entrance, nervous. When she saw him, she took a deep breath and approached. "Samuel," she said softly, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." He shook it gently. "Thank you for inviting me." Her eyes glistened slightly. "I meant what I said in the email. I'm sorry for the way I treated you." "I know," he said simply. "And I accept that." She looked surprised. "Just like that?" He nodded. "Because I don't forgive to make peace with others. I forgive to make peace with myself." As the evening unfolded, Samuel took the stage once again. This time, he didn't speak about dignity in theory, he spoke about what it looked like in practice. Real progress, he told the crowd, isn't about who gets the biggest seat at the table. It's about making sure there are enough chairs for everyone. Applause filled the room. The same chandeliers glittered, but this time, they reflected something warmer. Understanding. Victoria stood near the back, clapping through tears. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel above anyone. She just felt human. When the event ended, Samuel quietly slipped into the kitchen. The dishwashers were cleaning up the same way he once had. One of them, a young man from Haiti, looked up in shock. "You're him, the speaker." Samuel smiled. "I was one of you not long ago." The boy looked confused. "Then why are you here?" Samuel picked up a drying towel, helping him stack plates. "Because I never want to forget where I learned the value of respect." The boy grinned. "You're a good man." Samuel chuckled softly. "Just trying to be a decent one." That night, Victoria posted a photo of Samuel on stage with the caption, "The man I once laughed at taught me more about grace than I learned in 23 years of privilege." The comments flooded in, hundreds thanking her for honesty, thousands praising Samuel for humility. But Samuel didn't check his phone. He was sitting in his apartment again, writing his next speech, one that would reach an even bigger audience. Because now people were listening. 3 months later, the city that once barely noticed Samuel Reed couldn't stop talking about him. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like, "The Waiter Who Changed How the World Sees Respect." Everywhere he went, people wanted his time, investors, universities, even politicians. Yet Samuel remained grounded, often walking instead of taking rides, still stopping to thank the doormen and cashiers most people ignored. One morning, as he sipped coffee in a quiet Harlem cafe, his phone rang. It was Diane Caldwell, Director of Global Partnerships at the United Nations. "Samuel, I wanted to speak with you directly," she said. "We're establishing a new program, Voices of Dignity. It's designed to highlight grassroots leaders shaping education and equality. We'd like you to head it." Samuel leaned back, a slow smile forming. "You mean me?" "Yes. You'll be leading a global team, starting in Accra, Ghana. It's where your work began, and where it deserves to expand." For a moment he couldn't speak. The same streets that had raised him, the same schools with cracked walls and second-hand textbooks. Now he'd be returning not as a student, but as a leader. "When do we start?" he asked quietly. "Immediately," Diane replied. 2 weeks later, Samuel boarded a plane home. As the engines roared, he looked out the window, remembering the nights he'd walked through Manhattan in silence. A nameless waiter dreaming of something bigger. Now, he was flying under the UN emblem, his name printed on the boarding pass as Program Director, Voices of Dignity. The contrast made him laugh softly. "Life doesn't change overnight," he whispered, "but it sure knows how to turn a page." When he landed in Accra, the air felt familiar. The warmth, the sound of street vendors, the hum of life. Crowds greeted him at the education center he'd once attended as a child. Cameras flashed, but what caught his eye wasn't the attention. It was the group of young students waiting at the gate, holding notebooks and shy smiles. A small girl stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, we watched your speech. My teacher played it for our class. We want to be like you." Samuel knelt down so their eyes met. "Don't be like me," he said gently. "Be better than me." The girl smiled, gripping her book tighter. That same evening, he visited the local university auditorium to give his first lecture as part of the new program. Standing before hundreds of students, he began, "When I was your age, I thought the world only listened to certain accents, certain faces. But the truth is, the world listens when you speak from truth, not pride." Applause rose, but he raised his hand. "And don't wait for the world to give you a microphone. Build your own." The audience erupted. Outside, a local journalist asked, "Mr. Reed, after all you've achieved, from waiter to world leader, what's next?" Samuel smiled. "Teaching others not to need someone like me to be heard." Back in New York, Victoria Langford had been following his journey closely. The foundation dinner had changed her more than she expected. She'd begun volunteering at youth centers, helping underprivileged teens learn communication and confidence. But deep down, she wanted to do something bigger, something lasting. So she called him. "Samuel," she said when he answered, her voice steady. "I want to help with the Voices of Dignity program. My family's foundation can sponsor a campus. You told me once that respect shouldn't wait for status. Maybe it shouldn't wait for borders either." He was quiet for a moment. "You mean it?" "I do." Samuel smiled. "Then let's build it together." Months passed. In Ghana, the new Reed Langford Education Center began construction, a project blending her resources with his vision. The name wasn't chosen for publicity, but for balance. One name once mocked, one name once guilty, now united by redemption. When the center opened, students from all over Africa and the U.S. attended. Journalists crowded the gates, calling it a school born from a waiter's wisdom. During the opening ceremony, Victoria stood beside him, visibly nervous. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She smiled softly. "You're asking the wrong person. This time, I'm the one learning." They walked onto the stage together. Samuel spoke first. "A few years ago, I was invisible in a room full of people. I spoke and they laughed. But laughter fades. Truth doesn't. Today isn't about me. It's about every person who's been underestimated, every dream dismissed too soon." Then he gestured toward Victoria. "And it's also about those brave enough to admit they were wrong, and still choose to do right." The crowd stood in applause. Victoria stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "I once believed success was about being seen, but now I know it's about seeing others." The audience erupted again. Behind them, the school's banner unfurled with the words, "Dignity, Equality, Opportunity." Later, as the crowd dispersed, Samuel walked through the courtyard alone. The sunset painted the sky gold. Children played around the fountain, laughter echoing. This time, not cruel, but pure. Victoria joined him quietly. "Funny how life works," she said. "One dinner, one laugh, one mistake, and now this." Samuel nodded. "Sometimes the things that break us are the ones that shape us." She smiled. "And sometimes the ones we look down on are the ones who teach us to look up." They stood there in silence, watching the light fade. That night, Samuel sat by the window of his small guest house, looking out over Accra's skyline. He picked up his journal and wrote, "Dignity is not a gift to be given. It's a truth to be recognized. Every time we see a person for who they are, not what they wear or where they're from, we build a better world." He closed the book, smiling, because he knew this was just the beginning. 1 year later, the world had changed more than Samuel could have ever imagined. The Voices of Dignity initiative had spread to over 20 countries. Thousands of students were enrolled under scholarships inspired by his story. Schools across continents began every assembly by reciting his line. Respect shouldn't wait for status. It became more than a quote, it became a movement. And yet, despite all the accolades and attention, Samuel remained the same man who once quietly wiped tables in Manhattan. He still ironed his own shirts, brewed his coffee by hand, and walked to work whenever he could. But the world had one more surprise waiting for him. It started with a letter, stamped with a gold seal from Harvard University. It was short, formal, and life-changing. Dear Mr. Samuel Reed, we are honored to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of this year's Global Humanitarian Honorary Doctorate for your contribution to education, equality, and the redefinition of dignity across borders. We would be privileged to have you deliver the commencement speech for the class of 2026. Samuel read the letter 3 times, unable to believe it. Harvard, the very symbol of prestige, the kind of institution that had once felt galaxies away, now wanted him to speak to their graduates. He exhaled deeply. Full circle, he whispered. The day of the ceremony arrived. The Harvard courtyard was alive with sunlight, red banners, and thousands of graduates in black robes. Parents filled the seats, cameras flashing as the band played the opening notes of Pomp and Circumstance. In the front row, Victoria Langford sat quietly beside Diane Caldwell from the UN. Both smiled proudly as Samuel, now wearing an academic gown, walked to the podium. The same voice that had once been mocked for its accent now echoed through one of the most prestigious halls in the world. He looked over the crowd, young faces filled with ambition, older ones with pride, and he began. When I first came to this country, I thought opportunity was something you found, but I learned it's something you build, often when no one's looking. A hush fell over the audience. A few years ago, I served food to people who wouldn't meet my eyes. I was invisible until I realized that being unseen doesn't mean being unworthy. Your worth isn't decided by who notices you. It's decided by who you choose to become. Applause rippled through the crowd. Even the professors leaned forward, listening. To those who will leave here today, you will walk into rooms where people doubt you, misjudge you, or ignore you. Smile anyway. Do the work anyway. Because the loudest voice isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that stays steady through silence. He paused, scanning the faces. And to anyone who's ever laughed at someone's accent, clothes, or title, remember, someday, the person you dismissed may be the one you depend on for change. The words landed like a quiet thunder. Students began standing, one by one, until the entire courtyard rose in a standing ovation. Samuel stepped back from the microphone, emotion catching in his throat. He glanced toward Victoria. She was crying openly, clapping harder than anyone. Diane smiled beside her. You see, she whispered. He didn't just speak. He transformed them. Later that afternoon, during the private luncheon for speakers and faculty, the Harvard dean approached him. Mr. Reed, your words reminded us why we teach. It is an honor to have you here. Samuel smiled humbly. Thank you. But the real honor is being able to share what life taught me. Lessons no classroom ever could. Victoria joined them, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. To the man who redefined dignity, she said softly. He chuckled. To the woman who learned it firsthand. They clinked glasses. As evening fell, Samuel took a quiet walk through the empty campus. The red brick buildings glowed in the golden sunset. A group of janitors was sweeping up confetti near the stage where he'd spoken. He stopped, smiled, and picked up a stray piece of trash to help. One of the janitors, an older man with kind eyes, looked at him curiously. Sir, aren't you the man who gave that big speech? Samuel shrugged lightly. Yes, but tonight I'm just another man cleaning up after a good day. The janitor laughed. Most people wouldn't bother. Samuel smiled back. That's why most people never understand where real dignity starts. That night, In his hotel room, Samuel stood at the window overlooking the campus lights. His phone buzzed with messages from world leaders, news outlets, and friends, but he ignored them all for a while. Instead, he opened a small notebook and wrote his final reflection for the day. They once laughed at my accent. Now they quote my words. But respect was never about applause, it was about the mirror. What I see when I look back isn't success. It's peace. He closed the notebook and placed it beside the Harvard medal lying on his desk. Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant stars, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt truly seen, not because of who was watching, but because he had never stopped believing in his own voice. The next morning, a newspaper headline would read, "From waiter to world voice, Samuel Reed teaches Harvard what dignity really means." And somewhere in Accra, a little girl in a classroom would raise her hand proudly and say, "I want to speak like him one day." Her teacher would smile and reply, "Then start now. Speak with kindness." That's where he began.